Welcome to Stepping Out with Sheriff Mike Chapman.
Hi, Sheriff Mike Chapman here with another podcast episode of Stepping Out. We are honored today to be joined by Steve's son, who's got just an incredible law enforcement career, and we're going to get into that in a minute. We really appreciate you being here today, Steve. Before we get into that, what I like to do is try to get a little background on people here. I'm always kind of curious as to why people got involved in law enforcement, maybe their upbringing, maybe some things that, maybe it's team sports, maybe it's something that kind of motivated you to go into that particular direction. So tell us a little bit about yourself and, what prompted you to get involved in a law enforcement career?
Absolutely. And thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known you for many years, think very highly of you. So it's an honor to be here. I think everyone that goes into, whether it's law enforcement or military, has that pivotal moment in their life that was something that has a big influence for them. I started getting chills on my hand because for me, it goes back to the day we buried my father at Arlington National Cemetery. We came back, and I'd grown up in Southern California. I had a babysitter, Carol Briggs, but now Carol Brettanini, because she married a Fremont, California police officer. She became a police officer herself. They happened to come out and visit. They happened to be in town, not realizing it was my dad's funeral, and called my mom and said, "Hey, is it okay if we stop over?" And as she stopped over, I'm 16 years old. My dad passed away fairly young. He was a B-52 pilot.
Oh, wow.
I'm sitting there looking at her, and I'm looking at her husband, and her husband was about 6'5", 6'6". Just had tons of stories about how much he loved policing. And I looked at him, I said, you know what? I want to be a cop. That was where it first happened. And just kind of pursued it. I went, started, getting my associate's degree, started going to college, and always wanted to be a police officer. And I had an instructor that was with the FBI Technical Services Division, talked to me a little bit more about it, and went out and actually applied, and went in. Finally, been 1989, applied. Went in and actually toured the DC Police Academy, and back then they were going through a lot of budget cuts, and went in and talked to my recruiter, and I said, I think I'm going to withdraw my application. This academy doesn't look too good. And, I had applications in with a couple other agencies. Right. And he said, what do you have to lose? It's not the military. Give it a try. And it's the best decision I ever made.
Wow. Well, interesting, because we were just talking before this broadcast here, and I showed you a picture of myself when my dad, who was a retired Washington, D.C. police detective, pinned my badge on, So, and like you, I think that's kind of what prompted me to get in this line of work, because I grew up hearing the stories. And my dad passed away many years ago, but I grew up as a kid hearing the police stories, and I thought, wow, I can't think of a job more interesting than what we do. And I tell people all the time, what I like the most about this job is that when you go into work every day, you have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, every day is an adventure.
You have no idea. Trust me.
And so before we get into that, just a little bit about your, because I want to talk about DC, and when you're talking about adventures, you've really had some here, whether it's Washington, D.C. Police, certainly as the chief of Capitol Hill Police, but family-wise and all, what does your wife think about the profession that you chose, and kids and all that kind of stuff? Do you get a lot of support for this?
Lots of support. Lots of support. I still, to this day, I think it's an honorable profession. It's something I'd recommend. I've talked to a lot of kids about. Get a lot of support. So my wife, all the adventure I've been through, she's been through it with me. 33 years. We just had her 33-year anniversary.
Hey, congratulations.
So she's been there, ever since I just got out of the academy. Met her at my first 4th of July when I didn't have to work evenings. I worked day work, which was lucky, and then everyone after that I worked evenings. So lots of support. Kids love what I do. They do. I think I may have one eventually pursuing it. We shall see. But yeah, lots of support. I mean, I've never run into, when you tell people you finally want to become a police officer, you might lose one or two friends. Those aren't people I consider to be real friends. Yeah. Everybody else has been true supporters.
Well, that's great. That's great. And you can't make it through a profession like this without the support of your family.
That's right.
That's tough. And I always look at that personally, and I look at this agency in itself, and that's really what we try to do is a lot of support for each other. There's a lot of people out there trying to tear you down. So it's very, very important that we all kind of, work together, look out for each other. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what you went through, certainly as a chief of Capitol Hill Police. But I know you've had, you're no stranger to crisis situations. Okay, so I know when I was looking at some of the things that you'd had to deal with when you were working. So you worked your way up through the Metropolitan Police Department. So what assignments along the way did you have before you started getting hit with some of these major crisis situations?
So right at the academy, I was an officer in the 6th District. 6th District is Anacostia. It's east of the river, as people would say. And I really enjoyed it. I was there through 1995. And like I tell people, law enforcement is so much about personality and communications. If you go into a neighborhood and you can't develop communication, develop rapport, you're going to have a lot of problems. And that saved me a lot of times, got my key started a lot of problems. But I was an officer, I walked foot beats. I've been actually shot at on Sheriff Road. I've made a lot of really good arrests. And then in 1995, I got promoted to sergeant and got sent to the 7th District, which is still east of the river, southeast. Worked there for a little while, worked with a couple of people that were up and comings on the department. Had a number of responses, responded to a shooting at a liquor store. We had multiple people down in the parking lots, not knowing who we had down. Immediately went to work on one of the people who had a gunshot wound through the lung, through and through. Ended up, patching him up as best we could. Turned out to be an off-duty 5th District police officer.
Wow.
Who the fire deputy chief showed up the next day to say, you saved that guy's life. Then from there, I got promoted to lieutenant in, I don't know the exact year right now, 98 maybe, and got assigned to the 4th District. And while I was at the 4th District, was working on a couple of projects. Chief Ramsey had come in. He assigned a lieutenant at each of the districts to run an enhanced enforcement group, a specialized task force that brought together a lot of different city agencies, looked at systemic issues in crime, and would solve the issues. And our task force had the best results. We had the biggest drop in crime, biggest coordination with the neighborhood, relationships, stuff like that. And he ended up bringing me down to his office, and I was actually the chief of staff for Terry Gaynor, which was his number 2 person.
Okay.
Which to this day, I tell people that was probably the toughest job I've ever had, because this guy was on from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m., and It was go in that office. But while I was down there, I saw an opportunity for a lieutenant's position that was retiring from Special Operations Division. And I happened to mention it to Chief Gaynor one day. And the next day, Ramsey calls me in and he said, hey, you want to leave the family? And I said, no, it's not that I want to leave the family. It's just the Special Operations Division is something I've always wanted to do.
Right.
And he said, perfect, because we could use your help there. Went over there, and at the time, Special Operations Division is all the toys, all the bells and whistles within a police department. Your bomb squad, your helicopter, your horse-mounted, your harbor, all the nice tools that come with a very high level of responsibility. But we were moving the president almost on a regular basis. So when people think about the president moving, you have the Secret Service that protects the individual. We'd protect the motorcade. We'd protect the route, and we'd protect the motorcade. So on a daily basis, we were doing presidential movements, all through Washington, D.C. My first day walking into the planning office, they were drawing out maps with pieces of paper and pencil. And I said, this has got to end. We're bringing in computers, we're bringing in plotters, we're bringing it to the 21st century. And we did. We actually brought it all the way up to where we did our first operations manual on an iPad for the 2013 inauguration of President Obama's second inauguration. So that was really the start of where my specialized was. 1999, went to SOD, did the NATO 50th. That is just happening when I got over there. And since then, I worked on probably 34, 35 national special security events, which are the biggest, most secure events. 2001, we had the terrorist attack over in New York and the Pentagon. When the first plane hit, I was walking into my planning unit, saw one of the towers on fire, and turned to my staff. I said, hey, what's going on? And they're looking at their typewriters. They're just typing away. And they said, the plane hit the World Trade Center. I was like, well, that's odd. It's blue sky. And next to the phone rings, they go, it's the White House for you. And there's a guy by the name of Steve Woodard, who was a special agent with the United States Secret Service. He said, what do you think, Steve? I said, I don't know. I'm really worried about this. He had been involved in the 1993 bombing attack, the bombing attempt on the World Trade Center. He said, we have the same concern. As I'm talking to him, the second plane hits. He says, we're calling an emergency meeting at the White House. So on 9/11, I'm rushing to the White House as they're evacuating it to come up with the plans for securing the White House, the Naval Observatory, and the U.S. Capitol. So from there, it's been an incredible ride. Stuff I've been involved with, I've just never expected. I traveled around the world with Secret Service and the president, going to a couple different G8s, studying mass demonstrations, studying terrorist attacks. We went to 2015, went to Paris to study the Bataclan Theater attack over there. But 2009, we had the Holocaust Museum shooting.
Right.
I was the incident commander on that. 2012, the Family Research Council shooting. Incident commander on that. 2013, we had the Navy Yard. And then 2017, we have the attack on the Republican baseball team. So it's been a very, very busy career.
Yeah. So on these shootings here, okay. So the Holocaust. Tell us about that.
So 2009, we were all just kind of developing our incident response teams, our response to active shooters, things like that. I happened to just be driving through the downtown area when I heard the call go out for a shooting at the Holocaust Museum. Pull up, and like a good incident commander, I started telling people, hey, because we have all these agencies responding, go to 12th and C. 12th and D Street, which was away from the front of the Holocaust Museum, because we had a car that was double parked. The assailant had gotten out and gone up, and he had been shot. So at this point, he's down. And I'm trying to direct everybody to go to a staging location that's not next to his car, because we don't know if there's an explosive device in the car. Everybody pulls up and parks next to this car, and it looks like a used car lot. And you just try and learn from those situations. But what people don't realize is it was an MPD officer who had retired. He's one of my officers from the 4th District. He said, I'm done. I need to find a safe job. He goes, I found this job at the Holocaust Museum, and I became a guard. He's the one that shot Van Braun, I think is the assailant's name, at that shooting. So his wife made him quit that job too. But yeah, when you have those type of incidents go out, a lot of times it's just where you are at the time.
Right.
Both times I was traveling from SOD headquarters down to MPD headquarters. So it put me right in the area where the Family Research Council, which is up by the Capital One Arena, or Navy Yard. Navy Yard, I'll tell you, if you got a minute for that, I'll tell you that story. I'm coming across the Teddy Roosevelt Bridge, and every morning, probably like a lot of police officials, I call a lot of either my officials, or I'm calling other agencies, just saying, hey, what's going on, things like this. And I called to a guy with U.S. Park Police, a Major Pat Smith. And we're talking about the fact that we both have a SWAT team going on in Washington, D.C. So we have both, usually they're in Maryland, and it's a rarity that both MPD and Park will have it at the same time. So finish the conversation, hang up. And as soon as I hang up, a guy by the name of Captain Halbleib calls me and says, we've got an active shooter at the Navy Yard. Immediately hang up, start going code 1 to the Navy Yard, pick up the phone, I call Pat Smith, said, hey, we're dumping our SWAT team. We got a shooting at the Navy Yard. He dumps his SWAT team from the school, meets me at the Navy Yard, and he becomes my deputy incident commander on incident command, which we're doing from the trunk of a car at 11th and O Street, Southwest. So it's all about, when I talk about relationships, and I know we'll talk about that when it comes to January 6th, but relationships in law enforcement is so important. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, because crime doesn't adhere to jurisdictions. Crime, goes across, and you never know what's happening.
Right.
So you rely on your partner agencies, for whether it's officer wellness, whether it's to fight crime, whether it's chief's wellness.
Well, that's the key when you have a crisis situation there. You got to do things quick. You got to know who to call, and you got to get things the ball rolling. And that's what's so key about that. So I had an opportunity, and I'll tell you what, for anybody that hasn't read this book yet, I think you really need to. It's called Courage Under Fire. So I read this book a while back, and I'll tell you what, Steve, it's an amazing book. I don't know, 300 or so pages, and I mean, you really go into details about this. And I think a lot of people, when I look at the things that you see on TV, the presentations, on all sides of this, okay. And what I think in this book to me is that you captured, certainly the essence of really, really what was going on there, and all the obstacles that you had to deal with there. And so this was, certainly, obviously after you had taken the job as the Capitol Hill Police Chief. So before we get into that, tell us a little bit about how you went from being in your position there at Washington Metro Police over to be the Chief of Capitol Hill Police.
Absolutely. So the end of 2015, I retired. Went out and had gotten a job in the private sector, kind of working in intel and national defense, and I missed the work. I missed being in policing, things like that, and went down to the IACP conference in San Diego, 2016 IACP conference. And while I'm down there, I run into the Senate Sergeant at Arms, Frank Larkin. Ran into him with the Deputy Sergeant at Arms, and he asked me, what am I doing nowadays? And I'd known Capitol Police. In Washington, D.C., you have like 40 law enforcement agencies, but you have a lot of that agencies that work very closely together. Capitol, Secret Service, Park Police, MPD, Amtrak, Metro. Those are the key ones. But they had known my background and said, hey, we have an open for a assistant chief for operations. And they only had one assistant chief at the time. Asked me if I'd put in for it, and they said there's only one caveat: it closes today. So I had to put in for it really quickly. Went back and immediately talked to my wife. Luckily, she was with me at the time. Like you talked about that wife support. She said, by all means, go for it. Put in for it, and a couple of months later, I'm into the final process, and they selected me as the assistant chief. I was the assistant chief from January 7th. 2017, just days before President Trump's first inauguration, up through May 19th, 2019, at which point the chief had retired, and they selected me as the 10th chief of police for the U.S. Capitol Police.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, so you're no stranger to any crisis situations, and so that makes you exceptionally qualified, obviously, for what occurred on January 6th. But with all that happened, I mean, I know from reading this book here, you really had some major obstacles along the way with that, and some of that stuff obviously is as could have been preventable. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some of the struggles that you had internally and all that to try to, it's an interesting story. In a very short interview, we can't really do it justice, but I can tell you, from a bureaucratic standpoint, I know you had many things that got in your way from doing what you wanted to do, what you needed to do. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I never planned on writing a book. After every major event I've been involved with, but I always do an after-action report. Right. And I was stripped out of my office so quickly after January 6th, I found myself literally sitting at home. Initially, they had a security detail in the house because of threats, and then they took that off because once I got home, I said, guys, we don't need you anymore. I sat home and I just started gathering all my notes. I'll tell you, after 30 years in law enforcement, I keep damn good notes. So, I always keep really good notes. Started collecting notes, started just writing my own after-action report. And as I was writing my own after-action report, Capitol Police, I have a great relationship with them. I still talk to Capitol Police, DC Police cross country regularly. Started reaching out to me and started saying, hey, Chief, you have no idea what we were pushing up. Intel analysts would get in touch with me and say, here, let me give you some of the intel. Right. We were pushing up that should have been in the intel report where it's never put into the assessment. So I started having whistleblowers come out of the woodwork. I had whistleblowers from the FBI, whistleblowers from DOD come out of the woodwork. And I started just putting this puzzle together. I was like, this is just crazy. So I never expected to write it. I wrote it as an after-action report. I wrote it as apolitical. When you read through it, right. I try not to take a political position. I give you like what every cop says, just the facts.
Right.
So laid it out, and it became a book that now Congress refers to as the official after-action report for January 6th. It's been entered into the congressional record. So when you look back on January 6th, and now Congress, the reports have validated everything I've said. They've actually vindicated me and exonerated me in writing, one of only a handful of people in history that have been exonerated writing. But when you look at it, you're absolutely right. It could have been prevented. Right. So January 3rd, Sunday, January 3rd, I go and request the National Guard. I request it twice. People may say, why are you requesting on Sunday, January 3rd? January 3rd is the first day of a new Congress. So January 3rd, 2017 just happened to fall on a Sunday. We're all working. Right. Lots of new members of Congress are being sworn in. And I knew this would be a big concern for the Sergeant at Arms. Right. By law, to U.S. Code 1970, I have to get permission to bring in any resources for my men and women. I go and I ask the House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, who works specifically for Speaker Pelosi, and said, hey, I would like to bring in the National Guard specifically to assist with my perimeter. Right. I only had 273 officers on the perimeter, had a big fence line, and I knew if I don't have uniformed people behind that fence, people are going to be likely to jump it. His big concern was he goes, don't like the optics, and the intelligence doesn't support. It's a big deal to bring up the National Guard on Capitol Hill. Sure. And the intelligence didn't say that we were going to be under attack. He said, have you asked the chairman of the Capitol Police Board? Because remember, by law, I still have to go to the Capitol Police Board to get permission. The chairman just on that day became Mike Stinger, the Senate Sergeant at Arms. So he refers me over to the chairman. Yet before I can go and ask the chairman, he calls him and says, "Son's come here asking for the National Guard. We got to come up with another plan. I'll never get this by Pelosi." So by the time I get over to Stinger's office, Stinger denies my request. So I end up coming into January 6th without their support I need. We have a conference call on Monday, and I write about all this. I have a conference call with all my partner agencies on Monday. We meet with the members of Congress on Tuesday. My intel assistant chief is there. Again, they're saying there's intel that's not being included. No one's saying anything about this concern for an attack against the Capitol. We expect to be just like the two previous MAGA rallies. When I say that, November there was a rally, and then December there's a rally. So I call that MAGA 1, MAGA 2. I expect to be just like the two. Then we come into January 6th.
Right.
I don't have the resources I need. Would have liked them. And very few people pick up on this, but it's in the book. 10:53 in the morning on January 6th, I went ahead and called a guy by the name of Jeff Carroll. He's now the interim chief over at DC Police, and asked him if he could put resources near the Capitol. He did. He put 7 bicycle platoons near the Capitol, which was a lifesaver, I think. So 12:53, we come under attack. Well, 12:41, we have the first pipe bomb. 12:53, we come under attack. 12:55, I make my first call to DC Police saying, "Hey, send those resources." 12:58, I make my first call to the Sergeant at Arms. Okay. By law, I still have to go and get permission to bring in resources. Call Paul Irving. He says, quote, "Let me run it up the chain. I'll get right back to you." I make 12 more calls to the Capitol Police Board. 71 minutes later, they finally give me approval to bring in resources. 3 minutes before the first window of the Capitol is broken. So think about that. In that time, I didn't sit back and just say, "I'm not going to do anything." I made 32 phone calls to partner agencies, brought in 19 agencies, 1,900 police officers. We got the Capitol back in 4.5 hours. I was forced to resign, stripped of my retirement, while they gave the 19 agencies, I call them, the Congressional Gold Medal. You know, it's strange that that's how it worked out. Right. But my officers know the truth. Right. So that's all that matters.
Well, it must have been pretty therapeutic for you to write this book, to kind of get it all out there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. A lot of people have said that. It must have been pretty therapeutic. I don't know if sitting down, and I wrote for probably 14 hours a day, from 4:30 in the morning to whatever time I fell asleep, and then my wife would edit on top of it. Every word is written. Every word I wrote in there, except for the one she corrected. I guess in a way it's therapeutic. I can look back on it now and feel that it was therapeutic. It was stressful as hell at the time. Right. Because sometimes I couldn't really, I was like, wow, this is just a failure on so many different levels, whether it's failure of, making a decision, and they changed to the law 11 months after, based on my testimony, of adherence to the law, adherence to political influence. And then, I couldn't get the DOD to send me resources once I had the permission, because again, they were concerned for optics. Right. So it's just a cascading failures that contributed to what we dealt with on January 6th.
Well, when I read this, and it really cleared up a lot of things for me. I mean, to see that, I mean, there were, certainly, a lot of your officers were injured. And then there were some people that were really given extreme punishments for really what would have been trespassing in some cases there, So it's really kind of across the board, all aspects of that. So, having firsthand knowledge of this and seeing that, what's your follow up on that? Like, what do you think about some of the people that were, because it seems to me like some people were punished severely for things that would generally be, like a trespass, for example, would just be a fine that you pay. And then, but there were others, that certainly hurt some of your officers there. So what's your take on that?
So I write a little bit about that in the book, because I relate it back to the 2020 protests, the mostly peaceful protests. We had 3 days of riots at the White House. More officers were injured at the White House. More damage was done around the White House and the hotels. They tried to light the Haddam Hotel on fire, occupied. They made a few arrests. I think it's made 3 to 5 arrests, and all charges were dropped. Then 6 months later, we're dealing with January 6th. You have the largest investigation in FBI history, 1,900 arrests, approximately. And some of them, like you said, the most severest penalties I've seen. I'm you do the crime, you do the time type of cop. Sure. And there were people in there that injured officers. You have a lot of people that claim, Brian Sicknick died of natural causes the next day. Brian Sicknick collapsed of a double stroke that evening after being in the field for a number of hours. So regardless how you cut that, that's in line of duty death. Period.
Right.
Case closed. And you had other officers that were severely injured. My belief is, people that were involved in that, need to be held accountable. But when you line it up with my 30 years in law enforcement, and I've locked up a few people,
Right.
And the charges and the penalties I've seen come down, and how many of those cases I've seen no papered, which means there was no prosecution. You're absolutely right. A number of these people I think were over penalized.
Right.
When you're looking at people that were trespassing, which would have been a 61D, $50 fine, getting years in incarceration, it raised a lot of concerns for me.
I think you said solitary confinement in some cases, right?
Yeah, it's hard to denounce that there wasn't some form of disparate treatment there.
Right, right.
So, yeah, I do think that it would have been better off to, treat everybody the way people have been treated in the past.
Sure.
In Washington, you have more information coming out about, that prior to that, the FBI was, doing exercises on, how to go out and how to prosecute, because they had, been concerned about how protests have been getting prosecuted. I don't know, but it just raised a lot of concerns about how these people were prosecuted to a level I've never seen before. So I agree with you there.
Right. So so now you're back into the private sector, right? And so I'm sure you probably miss doing what you were doing there before.
I do. I still do a lot of work with law enforcement. Still a lot of work with emergency management. Doing a lot of work with some of the law enforcement up and down the northeast corridor.
Right.
Getting ready for a couple of I think there's some big soccer matches coming up. And things like that. I still love doing major events. Still doing a lot of that, and I'm teaching at a local university here in Washington, D.C., emergency management. Shocker. So I really enjoy that. And I do still work with a lot of law enforcement on technology integration. So really, really kind of enjoy that. But still, I stay in the mix with law enforcement. I would not rule out another book. We shall see.
Okay, I'll be looking forward to it.
See what the future brings on that. If not,
so what's your what would be your advice here? I mean, because we talk about this is a career, okay? What would you want to leave everybody with here when it comes to law enforcement, maybe picking it as a career? What are your thoughts on that?
So two things. One is still, like I said, it's a noble and very honorable career. There's two bits of advice I would give to the politicians out there. You get a lot of politicians out there that are really vilifying the role of police officers. Sure. And think of it this way: society needs law and order. And how would you feel if it was your son or daughter out there putting on the badge and going out to protect the community? What type of support would you want them to get? So look at that support. I would recommend any young person that's looking to go into law enforcement. It's a great profession. Look closely what you want to do. If you want to do federal, think about exactly what the aspects of federal are, the moving, the things like that. If you want to do local, but ultimately for me, it comes down to leadership. You see, if you have bad leadership in an agency, you're going to have disgruntled officers, you're going to have corruption, you're going to have issues. If you have good leadership, you won't have a retention issue. Right. You'll have people looking professional, they're acting professional, and they're treating people with respect, which is the way it should be. But I think it's a really good profession. The other bit of advice I'd give is, so for people going into it, great profession, just do your work. People that are in it, and this is we've done a lot for officer wellness. Mm-hmm. We've done a lot for, if you're not okay, say you're not okay, and let's get you the help you need. The people that are in the top positions, there's little research that's been done on really the stress that you have. Everyone's got the phone. You're worried about your officers 24/7. It never ends. You're worried about that traffic stop that goes bad. You're worried about having to talk to a family member with really the worst news you could give them. Sure. And that's always weighing on you. Yeah. So for the officials, captains, inspectors, chiefs, consider your own well-being. Sure. It's like in a airline, you put your mask on first before you help others. Look out for yourself a little bit.
That's good advice, especially when you're in the senior ranks there. The personal attacks that you get and everything else. Yeah, it's pretty tough. So, well, I'll tell you what, Steve, I want to thank you for coming in. This is just great. And for anybody that hasn't gotten this book, I'd highly recommend it because it really is the truth, from start to finish on what you had to deal with there. God bless you for going through all that and for staying strong and really Courage Under Fire is the perfect title for that book. So, so I want to thank you for being here today and all the work that you're doing and continue to do in this profession. What you've done in the past means a lot to us, and wish you all the best as you continue to march forward. Thanks, Steve.
I appreciate it. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.